Of the many insights that seem to rise from almost every page of Scripture, there is one that just leaps out to me again and again. And that lesson is that there is more. There is almost always so much more than we first perceive from a plain reading of the text or the plain reading of our lives. And so it is true with Joseph's life. As we come to study Genesis chapter 45, for the first time, after years of separation from his brothers, Joseph is about ready to reveal that he is more, so much more than they have ever imagined. He stands before them as the ruler of Egypt, and then he says, "Come closer." As they gathered around him closer, Joseph then revealed he was more, so much more than they imagined. He said, "I am your brother." Then in their shock, Joseph greeted them each with a kiss of peace. And then Scripture tells us that he wept upon them. And then after that, his brothers gathered around him and they talked. Now that's such a beautiful transition to a story that has been filled with so much trauma. It's easy to go to that neat and tidy ending of a chapter, but I don't want to go there too quickly yet. I want to sit with you in the trauma that has brought us to that place. The trauma that Joseph carried of being seized by his siblings with their intent and design to kill him, only then to be sold as a slave. And then, as a slave, to be sexually harassed, to be wrongly accused, and then unjustly imprisoned. That's Joseph's trauma. The brothers are carrying their own trauma. They're carrying the trauma of seizing their brother with the intent to kill him, selling him as a slave, assuming he was dead, telling their father that he had been attacked by a wild animal. The brothers carried the trauma of the family grief of losing a sibling. The brothers carried the trauma of starvation in the time of famine. The brothers are standing in front of Joseph because there was a famine all throughout the region. And so it's likely that those brothers had family members, close friends, who were starving, if not had already died because of the famine. There was trauma all around. But Joseph, in an extraordinary act of courage and humility and forgiveness and grace, embraced them. It reminds me of the proverb from pastoral counseling that says, the trauma that we do not transform, we transmit to another generation. As I've studied this passage, I was reminded of a resource that I received from Wheaton College about trauma. And there were just two lines that really struck with me in that resource. The first line is, trauma is complex. The second line is, helping doesn't have to be. Trauma is complex. Helping doesn't have to be complex. We see that in the story of Joseph. He approached his brothers with simplicity and love to help transform the trauma. And that provides a lesson for you and I today. We may have experienced trauma. Let us know that reaching out for help for that trauma doesn't have to be complex. If someone around us has experienced trauma, let us encourage one another that we may be instruments in God's hands to accompany one another through trauma. We can encourage, we can pray, we can accompany physically one another to mental and healthcare appointments as we seek to understand trauma in our own lives. And we can certainly assure one another that Jesus walks step by prayerful step every part of the way with us. As we close the study of the incredible book of Genesis and prepare to begin the study of Exodus, let us remember that the trauma that we do not transform, we transmit to another generation. Rather than transmitting the generational trauma, Joseph transformed it. And what he transmitted were blessings and hope for another generation. Generation after generation, God creates and recreates in a way that we can't fathom, so we call it love. Trauma after trauma, God creates and recreates in us transformation, and so we call it grace. Peace be with you this week.